Yo guys, I got the opportunity to write some software for PBS. Yes, the PBS that you know and love, and likely grew up with one way or another. The PBS that brought you developmental programming through generations, with shows like Sesame Street, Barney and Friends, Mr. Rogers, and so much more. I got to make software for that PBS. But calm down. This wasn't any super monumental software. I didn't build a big bird AI that can look at a child and give them wise words based on behavioral patterns from a dataset of billions of other children. In fact, it was just a simple data displaying software that I wrote in a couple of days. But I think there was still some fun to this story, so let us get into it. So, I don't know how many of you guys know this or not, but I used to edit for Diana, aka Physics Girl. Yep, that's right. For 3 whole years, I was the main editor for just about every video uploaded to her channel. Some of you guys at this point are going, yes, I already knew that. But I'm sure most of you guys are probably going, whoa, what? Now, of course, I tell you this for a reason. A maybe lesser known fact is that Diana's channel is produced by PBS, meaning they do everything that they can to help her make the best show possible. And having worked with her for so long, I've been able to meet the awesome team behind PBS, and they invited me out to this year's annual summit that they throw every year. Now, at these summits, they host what's called PBS Trivia Night, where they get all the PBS YouTube hosts to battle it out in a team versus team trivia showdown. And having been in the crowd for one the previous year, I asked the coordinator if I could write some software for this year's trivia night to help things go a bit smoother. He shockingly agreed that it'd be a fun addition, and that I pretty much had free reign to do whatever I wanted. I followed that up with an eye twitch because I didn't think he'd say yes to giving me so much power and control. But then, after a quick chat on the functionality that they wanted from the software, it was time to get to work. Now, before we get into writing the software, let's configure what I like to call a ladder, in which we will put our objective on top of the ladder and then work backwards, figuring out the steps it will take to get there. Then once we're finished, we'll climb up the ladder until we get to our end destination. And here is the ladder that I put together. So we want to have solid software that loads question data from a directory and uses wireless input for 2 teams. This is where we want to be. But in order to get there, we have to test the software as much as possible with all planned features implemented. But before that, we need to add our software functionality, which we'll return to later when we get a better idea on this. But before we can add the software functionality, we need to make our software foundation. But before that, we need to know what foundation and functionality we even need for this software. And so, that's where we'll start. I sat down and watched one of the previous trivia nights that was posted online and took notes on it. The most important thing here was to figure out all the problems and pain points that software could help solve, so that we could code the foundation of the software and build everything else on top of that. And here is what I came up with. From watching the video and having been in the audience for one of these in the past, I know that over time it can become quite hard to keep score. I believe a judge is writing down the score for these, but you often have a large number of people in the audience also keeping their own score in their head, and sometimes it can break out into a debate. I mean, one could argue that's part of the fun, but with software, we can patch that. Another problem is the buzzer system that they use. It's never dictated by software, so oftentimes the teams will fight over who was first if they all press the buzzers or shout at the same time. But with software, we can patch that. And lastly, I find it can be hard, or sometimes a time sink, for the host to have to sift through a bunch of cards to choose the next question and answer. And having gone through film school, I know that dead air can get you fired quick. But with software, we can patch that. And so, these are the major pain points that I will focus on for this software. And to revisit our functionality step, it has 4 parts to it with no particular order. Be able to load data, get wireless inputs working, add 2 screen displays for question and answer, and do a visual overhaul. Very important. I don't want to present PBS my programmer art, but great. I'm excited, and who knows, if this doesn't go terribly wrong, maybe PBS will contact me to add more functionality to it for another trivia night. I mean, it's only going to be used while a live audience is in the room, and the event is being streamed to however many thousands of viewers. No pressure. So now, let's climb up our ladder and get to coding. First off, figure out our foundation and functionality, Check. Second off, I'm using the Unity 3D engine for this because it will be the fastest thing I can use to make this. And the absolute very first thing that I added was a scrolling PBS background. Listen, I know the visual overhaul is much further up the ladder, but I just need to remind myself that who I have the honor to write this software for is, well, you know. Anywho, got that in, looking spiffy. Then I got to work on laying out the foundation. Now, this is why I think it's always best to plan out your software on digital paper before anything. You really get a feel and understanding for your software domain, meaning everything you'll need. It really reduces the amount of guesswork that you have to do. And looking at the clock, I only have a couple of days to my flight, so now it's time to put my head down and do some lines. Alright, now check this out. Here's where I'm currently at. I'm gonna walk you through my thought process. So at first, I had the question of how many questions can I shove on screen and still have it be readable? Unsure what specs I was working with at the event, I just played it safe and went with a 3x6 layout. 3 columns with 6 questions in each, making it a total of 18 questions. But then I realized 18 is not a lot of questions for an hour-long cast. I'm positive they'll need a lot more than that. But if I increase the number of questions on screen, I will reduce the size of the text for each question, making them harder to see. But that's when I realized that they also use categories, and man, what lifesaver that was. Without increasing the number of questions that can be on screen at a time, I just added a new dimension, which is the categories dimension. So now, the software allows for 18 categories by 3 columns by 6 questions per column, equaling 18 categories with 18 questions, giving a total of 324 questions. Much better. Lay the software foundation? Check. I then added room to display both team logos to the top, and a little command caption that tells you what action to do. But the most important thing of them all, I created a very simple data encoding for inputting the questions, categories, and answers, which is pretty much just a CSV formatting, or comma separated values, but on a text file. Because if any questions had any commas, I didn't have the time to fiddle with this and prevent formatting bugs, especially at the fact someone else was going to be responsible for creating these data files. And so I simply restricted the data files to be a CSV, but on a text file. But yeah, all of this was working as expected. Able to load question data? Check. But it was at this point it marked the end of the day and it was time for bed. But on the drive home, I got to thinking about the software more and had to scrap one of the functionalities from the latter. You see, I realized that the 2-screen functionality like I originally wanted was pointless. I wanted to have a private facing screen that would have all the controls, show the answers, and all that good stuff for the admin. And then another public facing screen to show the question and score to the audience. But this would mean that the host would have to worry about being near the private facing screen to always see the answer, and I have no idea the flow for this trivia night. So ultimately, this would just be a waste of time. Add 2 screen displays? Scratch that. Before bed, I updated the PBS folks with a new plan, then went to sleep. The next day, I added a bit of polish. Got some assets from PBS like an official logo and some fonts, added those in. I added the functionality to be able to load team logos, names, and color from a directory, as well as loading funky sound effects acting as buzzers from a directory. I made some animations for when buzzers were hit, added a main menu UI for debugging and reloading data and such, and I mean, I'm not the best artist, but I was quite satisfied with how the final software was looking. UI overhaul? Check. Next, the part I definitely probably shouldn't have procrastinated on, getting some sort of wireless buzzer input to work. So when I first thought to pitch this to PBS, I immediately thought about using Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons, because in my personal opinion, they are the coolest gamepads to ever hit the shelves. The form factor is so sleek, feels so good in your hands. I mean, just look at that ice. But I was a bit worried because I did a previous demo using the Joy-Cons, and from my experience, they behave a bit more erratically than your average gamepad. But I was hoping a high-stakes event like this will force me to adapt and learn how to use the Joy-Cons with Unity, and very quickly. Now, at the time I started this Joy-Con research, my flight was the next day. And it started off to a very bad start. I plugged them into my PC and got some really really strange behavior. Sometimes it would just tweak out and there would be maybe a 15% probability that a button press would register. Sometimes the Joy-Cons would connect, then disconnect, then repeat. The Joy-Con mapping would just switch from player 1 to player 2 randomly for some reason. I even got a strange error inside of the gamepad settings while in the middle of testing it. It was very hard to debug, and even harder to not feel sick knowing I had a flight in less than 12 hours to Washington, D.C. I had no idea where to begin with figuring this out. And so it's like 2 a.m. at this point, and I took a much needed candy break to think about my options. My inner dialogue went something like this. Okay, Joy-Cons, as badass as they are out. But what now? I mean, I could run to Maker's Disneyland and buy some single button gamepads before my flight. But then I'd have to fiddle with those and figure those out if they aren't straightforward. And besides, a quick Google search isn't showing anything popular like that. Well, I could just use the gamepads that I use for my indie game Staggered, but man, nothing beats the simplicity and universal look of a Switch Joy-Con. I have to figure this out. I refuse to give up just yet. And so at this point, I realized that my laptop will be the hardware that will be running this software. So let me just start testing on that from now on. I booted up a build of the software on my laptop, synced the Joy-Cons to give it a try, and would you look at that, working seamlessly as desired. Just to make sure it wasn't a fluke, I tried it again, but a bit further away this time. Yo, listen, I still don't know what fixed it, but it was way too early in the morning for me to care. I was willing to take whatever victory I could. Now, I don't know about you, but I think all this headache deserves a follow on Twitter. Link is in the description. Anywho, I suspected that maybe the Joy-Cons were connected to both my PC and laptop giving weird behavior. I don't know. But I stuffed one of my game dev gamepads in my bag just to be on the safe side. Okay, make that I stuffed 2 gamepads. But don't tell anyone that I done goofed and forgot to pack the receivers. Anywho, to sleep. The next day, I was on the plane to Washington, D.C., and what a blast my flight was. I got to play a little Zelda Breath of the Wild. Yes, I just started playing this game. I don't have a lot of time, sue me. I watched the flight path in real time. I don't know why, but I love flights that have this thing. And of course, got to do some more testing for the Joy-Cons. And here, everything ran smoothly again. So taking a look at our ladder, get wireless inputs working, check. But unfortunately, this was about as high up on the ladder I was able to get. I had no more time for testing, which means I have no idea if this is solid software or not. Brackies, take the wheel. Oh, and by the way, I found this is the best way to go pee on a plane with a lot of turbulence. Take heavy note on the head wedge technique. It will come very useful if you have any flights going over the Colorado mountains.
Air traffic control tells us once we get on the other side of the front range of the Rockies here, we're going to get some improvement in the ride.
I land, get to the hotel, and didn't really feel much after this part though. I think mostly because my mind was in super catch up on sleep and make sure I have everything I need for this software mode. But the trivia night was at the very end of the summit. That was over a span of 2 days, and I had a blast at the summit. We had many discussions and debates about YouTube and education and all that good stuff. Had some really good food. Sorry I don't have any pairing video for any of this. Had a slew of speakers. You know, just all that juicy summit stuff. Then at the end of it all, it was finally showtime. A few hours before the event, I got the data files and just plopped them right in. Then, I walked to a local Best Buy to buy some new Joy-Cons, because PBS wanted 2 buzzers per team, and once I had those, I just quickly patched those into the software. And then, we got to the venue. I did an audio-visual test with the AV team, did a run-through with the host and software operator, and then I learned that I was going to be participating on the trivia night. I mean, I felt really honored because, again, little old me was going to be exposed to the PBS audience. But I also felt kinda bad, because whoever team I was on was sure to lose. I suck at trivia and answering questions on the spot. RIP to my team.
Jabril Ash is up next. He's a #1 candidate if they ever make a reboot of MacGyver. Jabril, come here, brother. Come on, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
I like to write computer code.
Everything was going as smooth as fried butter, minus me not having a clue how to answer any of the questions. Then, this happens.
Music.
Music it is. We can blame that on Jabril. Oh, that was the answer he probably just posted.
As soon as it happened, I immediately knew what was causing this bug. And no, Toussaint, that isn't the answer that's on screen right there. Allow me to explain. Remember earlier in the video when I was saying that I didn't want to use CSV or comma separated value encoding due to commas and questions potentially causing bugs? Well, guess what? I told you about a potential bug and then did absolutely nothing to prevent it. Listen, I have absolutely no excuse. I don't know what to tell you. Plain and simple, that was just a noob mistake. If I would have just went with a TSV or tab separated values file, I would have been absolutely bug free. But hey, for only a couple of days of development and almost no testing, I'll take that single mild bug as a victory. But anywho, that was pretty much my story on how I wrote software for PBS. And if you want to watch the full stream, the link to that is in the description. But after trivia night was over, I got to hang out and chat with the PBS folk for a while. Then it was back to my hotel to call it a night. Then the very next day, I was on a flight to San Francisco for the Game Developers Conference, which is a whole other video. But you know guys, I want to extend a big thanks to PBS for allowing me to do this. I know it may seem like not a big deal to them, but this was huge for me. It's crazy to think back when I started programming and how unattainable everything felt, to now being able to write software for one of the US's most cherished brands, even if it was just for a little one-off event. I will never forget the feeling of seeing all the amazing stuff being done with programming and thinking to myself how cool it would be to one day be able to do that kind of stuff. Believe in yourself guys. And remember to always feed your curiosity.